to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a pretty interesting theological argument, one that actually uses biblical texts to challenge the identity of Jesus. It's a case that's all about logic, integrity, and the powerful words of King David.
So let's just jump right in with the question that the source material uses to frame this entire analysis. What would David have thought of Jesus? Right away, this sets the stage for a really deep dive into character, consistency, and what it means to be a leader. So where does this argument even begin? Well, it kicks off by zooming in on what it claims is a major conflict, right in the Gospel of John. It hones in on two specific statements from Jesus that, when you put them side by side, they seem to be in total opposition.
And this really gets right to the heart of it. I mean, look at this. On one side, in John chapter 5, you have Jesus saying, "If I testify about myself, my testimony is not valid." Pretty straightforward. But then, just a few chapters later in John 8, he says, "Even if I testify about myself, my testimony is valid." On the surface, I mean, that looks like a classic contradiction.
Now, the source is careful to point out that, these statements weren't just made in a vacuum. The context was totally different each time. In John 5, he's talking right after a healing, and he actually points to John the Baptist as a witness for him. But later in John 8, he's in a direct confrontation with the Pharisees, and he bases his claim on his own divine knowledge. So how does the source make sense of this? For the author, this isn't just about, tailoring a message to a different audience. No. They see it as a huge red flag, something that points to a much, much deeper problem.
And the source material doesn't pull any punches here. The claim is that this apparent flip-flop isn't just a simple inconsistency. It supposedly raises questions about his integrity and even his sanity. To really pin down this flaw, the source gives it a very specific name.
And that term is double speech. The source defines this as holding two opposing opinions, which it says is a sign of a lack of integrity. And this idea, this concept of double speech, is absolutely central to the whole argument we're about to unpack. Okay, so to really build this case, the analysis does something interesting. It shifts gears. We're moving from the New Testament all the way back to the Old Testament. It turns to King David and the Psalms to set up what it presents as the gold standard for integrity. And this is the standard we're talking about. This verse from Psalm 119 lays it out pretty clearly. David doesn't just disagree with or dislike the double-minded. The text says he hates them. It's a really strong stance. So the argument here is making a really direct connection. It's saying that David's hatred of the double-minded is basically the same thing as scorning the exact traits it just accused Jesus of having, this double speech and lack of integrity. See how it's starting to connect? All right, so we've got Jesus' supposed double speech on one side, and we've got David's absolute hatred for the double-minded on the other. Now comes the part that ties it all together, the linchpin that tries to turn this from an observation into a full-blown argument about identity. And here it is, the critical link. The source points to the well-known theological tradition of referring to the Messiah by the name David. The implication there is pretty clear, right? If the Messiah is called David, then he must share David's core character, his values, and his standards. Okay, let's just take a second and recap the logic here. Step 1, the source identifies what it calls double speech in Jesus' words. Step 2, it uses David's hatred for the double-minded as the ultimate benchmark for integrity. And then step 3, it forges a link between the character of the Messiah and the character of David himself. And once you follow that chain of logic, it leads the author to a very, very direct conclusion about whether or not Jesus fits the bill of the Messiah. The argument basically asserts that a trait like double speech isn't just a minor flaw, it's a fundamental disqualification. According to this line of reasoning, anyone who shows these traits simply cannot be the Messiah who is so closely linked to David's character. Which brings us to the source's final verdict, presented as the logical outcome of all this evidence. Therefore, it says, we can deduce it is not Jesus. A very blunt conclusion. So, when you boil it all down, you can see how this case gets built. It all starts with a very specific comparison of two verses. Then it pulls in a standard for integrity from a completely different part of the Bible. And finally, it connects those 2 points to reach a definitive conclusion about identity. So, we'll leave you with this final thought that this whole analysis brings up. How much does the context, the who, what, when, and where, really shape our understanding of what someone says and whether or not it shows integrity? It's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.